In the underworld, the ghosts of Troy warned Odysseus that the old laws of glory were dead. But before he learned that lesson in the dark, he had to learn it in the light. He had to learn that the trap that held him was built by his own mouth. Shortly after the walls of Troy burned, the sea was not yet a curse. The winds were favorable, the black ships were heavy with plunder, and the map home was clear. But survival was not enough for a king who had spent 10 years carving his name into the history of the world. The fleet dropped anchor off the coast of a wild, unnamed island. It was a land without ships, without laws, and without gods. It was the territory of the Cyclopes, massive, solitary monsters who answered to no king. Odysseus took 12 of his best men and walked inland. He expected the old rules of the world to hold true. He expected the safety of a guest. Instead, he found a cave that smelled of rotting whey and raw meat. When the owner returned, the shadow that fell over the mouth of the cave blocked out the sun. Polyphemus was a mountain of muscle and coarse hair. He drove his massive flocks of sheep inside, and then, with casual, terrifying ease, he lifted a slab of solid rock the weight of a mountainside and dropped it over the entrance. The doorway was sealed. No 50 men could have moved it. Odysseus stepped forward from the shadows. He spoke the language of the old world. He invoked the gods. He demanded guest gifts, reminding the giant that he was a warrior of Agamemnon, a conqueror of Troy. Polyphemus did not argue theology. He did not care about Troy. Without a word, the giant reached out, grabbed 2 of the hardened Greek veterans by their legs, and swung them like grain stalks against the stone floor. Their skulls shattered. The giant tore them limb from limb and ate them raw, crunching through bone, marrow, and bronze armor alike. Then he went to sleep. In the dark, Odysseus drew his sword. He crept toward the snoring mass of flesh. The killing stroke was clear. A single upward thrust beneath the ribs would end the threat. But as the bronze hovered over the skin, the cold logic of the trap froze the king's hand. If he killed the monster could not move the stone. They would slowly starve to death in a tomb of their own making. He was caught in a bitter knot. To survive, he had to let the butcher live. Over the next day, Polyphemus ate 4 more men. With every sunset, the king's crew grew smaller. To survive the cave, Odysseus had to abandon the instincts of a warrior and learn to scavenge in the dark. He found a massive piece of unseasoned olive wood, ordered his men to sharpen it to a brutal point, and hid it deep in the dirt. That evening, when the giant returned and ate 2 more men, Odysseus stepped forward not with a sword, but with a bowl. He offered the giant dark, unwatered wine from his ship's stores. Polyphemus drank. He demanded another. The alcohol, foreign to the brute's blood, hit him like a heavy stone. As the giant swayed, he asked the Greek king for his name, promising him a final gift in return. This was the moment the scale tipped forever, the moment the king had to choose between his pride and his breath. "My name is Nobody," Odysseus said. The giant laughed, a wet, terrible sound. "Then my gift to you, Nobody, is that I will eat you last." The giant collapsed, vomiting into the dirt. Odysseus and 4 men dragged the sharpened olive stake from the shadows. They thrust it deep into the dying embers of the fire until the point glowed white-hot. They moved in silence. They hoisted the burning timber onto their shoulders, positioned it perfectly over the giant's single closed eyelid, and drove their entire combined weight downward. The giant screamed. The sound was so concussive it knocked the men backward. Blood and boiling fluid hissed around the burning wood. Polyphemus thrashed in agony, tearing the stake from his face, roaring for help. The other Cyclopes on the island heard the shrieks and gathered outside the sealed rock. "Who is killing you?" they shouted through the stone. "Is someone attacking you by force or by deceit?" Polyphemus howled back from the dark. "Nobody is killing me! Nobody is attacking me!" Outside, the giants muttered to themselves. If nobody was attacking him, it must be a sickness sent by heaven. They turned and walked away. The trick had worked. By shedding his name, Odysseus had severed the giant from his reinforcements. When dawn broke, the blind, bleeding monster rolled the boulder back to let his sheep out to graze. He sat in the doorway, sweeping his massive hands over the backs of the animals to ensure no men were slipping past him. But Odysseus had lashed his men beneath the bellies of the thick-fleeced rams. As the giant felt the wool on top, the men clung silently to the undersides. They passed right through the monster's hands, suspended inches from the dirt, breathing the stench of their dead friends on the giant's fingers. They reached the sunlight. They ran to the ship. They pushed off the sand. They took the oars and began to row. They had won. The escape was perfect. This is where the story should have ended. This is where the king should have sailed home in silence, accepting that survival was its own reward. But as the shoreline receded, a sickening tension began to build in Odysseus's chest. He looked back at the towering, blinded monster stumbling along the cliffs, hurling massive boulders into the sea at random. The rocks crashed into the water, churning the ocean into white foam, sending shockwaves into the wooden hull. Odysseus was safe, and he hated it. He could not bear the anonymity. He had spent 10 years bleeding on the plains of Troy just to ensure his name would outlive his flesh. The idea that this titan would sit in his cave, defeated, and never know who had broken him was an insult his blood could not swallow. Against the frantic begging of his crew, Odysseus stood up at the prow of the ship. He filled his lungs with the salt air. He shouted across the water, "Cyclops, if any mortal man asks you how you lost your eye, tell them it was Odysseus, the sacker of cities, the son of Laertes, the king of Ithaca." The silence that followed was absolute. On the cliff, the bleeding giant stopped thrashing. He lowered his massive hands. Polyphemus did not just throw another rock. He knelt on the cliff edge, raised his hands to the sky, and spoke directly to the god of the ocean. He took the name the king had just offered and used it to draw a target on the ship. "Hear me, Poseidon, lord of the dark sea," the monster prayed. "If I am truly your son, grant that Odysseus, king of Ithaca, never reaches his home." The sea beneath the black ship suddenly went cold. The wind died. The curse was locked in. He had not been cursed by a monster. He had forged the chains of his own exile, handed them to his enemy, and demanded that they be locked. The long ruin of the Odyssey did not begin with a storm. It began with a boast. Next time, we watch a king learn that the ocean does not forget a name. Subscribe and wait for the reckoning.